welcome to the second show of the second night of this year's Pint of Science Festival. As they say, second the best, so no pressure here. Hopefully you've just joined us following the earlier Planet Earth show, but if not, be sure to check out the Pint of Science website for any of the other shows you might like to attend. But enough of the other shows, let's start talking about our show, and this should give you some food for thought. I'm one of your hosts, Alex Holmes.
And I'm your other host, Maria Nikolova. We're both PhD students at the University of Leeds, and we'll be speaking to two academics from our institution tonight about the science of food. And speaking of our topic tonight, we would like to know what your favorite food is. Mine, for example, is watermelon because it's so refreshing in summer. Although I have to say I haven't tried it with feta cheese because I'm not that adventurous with food. And now I will just hand over to Alex, who will tell us how tonight's going to go.
Thanks, Maria. So you might have guessed that we're currently in the welcome and introduction part of tonight. We'll then be turning the spotlight onto you and what you think, followed by our first speaker, Christine. And then for anyone that wants to pop to the loo or sort out a quick brew, we have a 5-minute break and a challenge for you to mull over while the kettle boils. Then our second speaker, Mark, will be telling us whether we can outrun a bad diet. As someone that's just started the Couch to 5K programme, I certainly hope so. We'll then have a 10-minute discussion with both speakers where we'll need you sharing your thoughts and questions in the comments, and then we'll wrap up with our final thoughts. Sound good? Okay, let's get started by asking you your thoughts on some topics. So I'll need you to go to www.menti.com and use this code 373749. And I'm going to be asking you some questions about what you think about certain topics. So our first question is, which do you think is more important for health? Is that exercise, diet, or the same? Oh, we're currently 50-50 on on exercise, and they're the same. Hopefully we'll get a flood of you joining and we might change the scales a little bit. I'll just wait for you all to get on to www.menti.com and use the code 373749. We're evenly split. Okay. Oh no, they're the same. Oh, this is so exciting, seeing them all rush in. Okay, diet's definitely in the lead, unless we have a last-minute rush for exercise. Wow. Oh, it's so cool seeing this in live. Okay. Oh, they're the same, it's creeping back up the charts. There might be a last-minute rush. I'm really enjoying this. I'm sorry if nobody else is. Okay, we've had 52 of you respond, 56, 60. Or maybe we can push to 70 of you. Yep, over 70. Okay, we've got 188 people watching right now, so maybe we can push to all of you replying and see where we can push diet off the top spot. 83 of you, 85 of you, 86, 88. Diet's just creeping up and up. Over 50% of you think that it's diet. I'll give it a second more to plateau. Oh, 102 of you have replied. Oh, this is so exciting. I'm so glad that you're all taking part in this. I have one more question for you after this. So it seems to have stuck at 49, 37. Exercise really isn't getting any love. Maybe our talks will change your mind on that one. So now I'm going to take you over to the second question I have for you. This is an open typing question, which is, what does the word antioxidant make you think of? So just type in what your answer might be. It might be superfood, like we already have. Green tea, that's a good one. Might be health, might be, I don't know, what's antioxidant make me think of? It makes me think of my lectures from my first year of my undergrads, but that might be a bit specific. The same. Or maybe you've never really thought about what antioxidant means to you. So in that case, nothing. Free oxygen radicals. Who is putting some of these in? We've got some scientists in tonight. All the good stuff. Prevention, healthy, longevity. That's a good one. Free. Oh yeah, antioxidant free. Chemistry, wine, nice. Fads, tomatoes. Bathroom cleaner. This is so cool seeing it all jig around like this. Blood, detox, prevention, extra nutrition, recovery, telomeres. Somebody likes their genetics. Okay. Grapes, good for you. Cleansing, free radicals, and blueberries seems to be the main one. Okay. That's also what I think of. I remember my chemistry teacher in my GCSEs telling me that blueberries were full of antioxidants. So I'm glad all your chemistry teachers told you the same thing. So we've had 130 of you respond to that. I'll give it a couple more seconds, see if anyone else wants to put their thoughts in too. Combating toxins has come up. Anti-cancer, that's a good one. That's very topical. Free, yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, marketing. That's an interesting one. There's some skeptics in the audience. Okay, I'm gonna finish with the what does antioxidants make you think of? But thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think we've also had enough of me for tonight, so I'm gonna hand you over to Maria, who's gonna introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Alex. That was super exciting, and your narration of the numbers was really a nice touch. It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker for tonight, and that's Dr. Christine Bosch, who is a lecturer in nutrition at the School of Food Science and Nutrition at University of Leeds, and she's going to be telling us a little bit about antioxidants. Take it away, Christine.
Yeah, hello and good evening to most of you. My name is Christine, and I want to talk about antioxidants to you tonight, okay? Antioxidants, as has come up already, are often used as a buzzword for marketing also. So I want to just roll up what is their role behind the hype maybe, and what is their sort of link to health and potentially to disease prevention, okay? So antioxidants, just a brief look. We're dealing with lots of different structures, lots of different sources. We're most familiar maybe with vitamin C, vitamin E, carotenoids, and other naturally occurring antioxidants like polyphenols, flavonoids, and they are present in many different sort of type of fruit and vegetables which we daily consume, such as citrus, etc. Okay, overall. They are present in plant-based foods. So as we know, hopefully all. Okay, so some different structures are also present. So you can see that some of them are rather water-soluble, whereas other, such as vitamin C on top, or polyphenols, betalains, and some of them like carotenoids are lipid-soluble. Okay, so they have different solubility, they have different properties. Just to dive in the world of antioxidants, we cannot avoid talking about oxidants or oxidative stress as well. And someone has mentioned that, or has come up with that already. Indeed, we're living in a world full of stress, so living in an oxygen atmosphere as well. But we are exposed to sunlight, UV radiation, to air pollution, smoking, every time driving our cars, different types of stresses. So there are exogenous and endogenous stressors, including poor nutrition, that sort of contribute to giving us stress. Okay, and this stress is linked to the generation of radicals, oxygen radicals, many of them, and this has been linked to a number of diseases like aging, complications, premature aging, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, certain skin conditions, chronic inflammation, neurodegeneration, and others. Okay, so I'm sure many of you will have heard this as well. So stress is leading to free radical production. So this is important to remember. Okay, so the free radicals, we also call them ROS, reactive oxygen species. Are they the bad guys? Well, if you look on the right side, sort of what we call redox homeostasis in every one of our cells and in the organism is like it's having the right balance between oxidation and antioxidant status. So we call this redox balance. If the balance is not right, we call about oxidative stress. What happens is the damage of cell material like lipids, proteins, nucleic acids. All of these can get damaged by oxidation. Okay, and then we have these radicals, these stresses. We have superoxide radicals, we have hydrogen peroxide, and many others. So they come in with different names, different characteristics, different lifespan. What they do is they are able to impact our cells. Okay, so they are they could be they sort of could be produced in the cell, or could be from outside the cell. However, what they do is they disturb what's happening normally in a cell, and it can lead to cell death. auto alterations that might be linked to certain disease pathologies. Okay, if we just look at some examples of aging, and this is maybe not what you have expected. So radical production is linked to aging and complications. We can see these. We can see this in fruit, for example, like in this apple, but we can also see it in humans. So aging is a normal process, but it has been implicated with the generation of radicals, of oxygen radicals. Okay, so I just selected this example because it seemed easy to illustrate. But what is happening underneath is very complex, a very complex layer of different types of reactions going on. So we have the stresses, we have UVA, UVB. What do they do? Well, they cause a little bit of ROS in our skin cells in this case, okay? And that leads to, we don't need to understand all this in detail, that leads to the changes in the cell signaling, what happens in the cell, okay? And important to stress is that a little bit of ROS production is important for cells to function, okay? So that is not necessarily bad. However, if it's overshooting, if we have overshooting ROS production or DNA damage, could be through UVB or in combination also with inflammatory stimuli or others. What happens? We have an overstretching of the system, so we do have a disturbed redox balance. So we have a production of procarcinogenic molecules, for example. So overshooting inflammation and oxidative stress can lead to mutations. It can lead to cancer. But what we also find is that in the skin, the synthesis of collagen is impacted, so that we actually have a collagen degradation. So that means what we can visually see, what we saw on the previous slide, was the matrix degeneration, so skin integrity being damaged. So we can see this as wrinkling, okay, and we obviously don't want to see the wrinkling too early, okay. So let's move on. So how is this? How does it work? Antioxidant and radicals. Is there a concept? And yes, indeed, this has in the 1990s. It has been discovered that antioxidants can scavenge free radicals. Okay, radical meets an antioxidant. We have a donation of electrons to the free radical, and that means the removal of radical, at least for the moment, and the oxidative stress. So this has caused a huge interest in to media and food and supplement industry, as you can imagine. It was also accompanied by findings that a low intake of fruit and vegetables, which are the sources of antioxidants, that they are leading, low intake is leading to greater risk to develop certain chronic conditions. And a number of many clinical trials have been started in the following to test these compounds that have the antioxidant compounds as supplements, in particular beta-carotene and vitamin E. So huge hype. However, looking at the science, there's no or very little scientific evidence from properly controlled trials for protective effects of antioxidant supplements against, for example, heart disease or cancer. That was very a reality shock. So the hype, however, the hype continues to add antioxidants to food products, cereals, sport bars, lots of other things, and some antioxidant-rich foods are being called superfoods because of their high amounts of antioxidants. Okay, and I've explained already where antioxidants, where we can find these antioxidants in fruit and vegetables, so plant-based foods. And if we, so there's been a huge interest in comparing different, if you think of attributes like superfood, in comparing different food categories or different fruit types, and according to their antioxidant content or property capacity. Okay, and one of the one of the major tests that is being, which you might be familiar with, is the ORAC test, oxygen radical absorbance capacity value. It's been used over many years to compare and rank food and food ingredients, and being heavily used for marketing purpose. Okay, a couple of years ago, so this has been taken offline because it has. We have realized, I don't know how well you can read this here. We have got some examples of fruits here. We've got, for example, acai berry is very high, and different other berries, blueberries, chokeberries as examples of a relatively high or with relatively high ORAC values. However, this it has been realized that this represents a total oversimplification of what is actually happening, because these ORAC tests and similar other tests are not evaluating the quality and the potential health benefit of food or food ingredients. They simply follow chemistry rules, okay? And this is just an example. It's actually an alternative test of my own research group. If we have molecules that look pretty much the same, if you look at them briefly, but they only have tiny differences here in hydroxyl group, and here is a methyl group added on. And what we can is the first three here. What we can see here is that they score very differently in this sort of antioxidant capacity test. Okay, so the two compounds that have only one hydroxyl group here on the right side, they have only half the activity, okay? But in fact, if we look at biological effects, which we have done in our research, we can actually see that a compound on the bottom, the isoramnitine, is one of the most active ones in comparison, okay, equal to quercetin or even higher. So these tests don't really tell you what's actually happening, okay? So this has been very enlightening for many people, and obviously very disappointing probably for the industry in sort of utilizing this tool for marketing purpose. And we can also ask ourselves what should we do then? How much is on the story about antioxidants? So is there let's look at some evidence that antioxidants are really beneficial for us. And what I picked out to demonstrate is an example that's probably very frequently used is linked to cocoa, okay? So beneficial effects of antioxidant food. If we eat a dark chocolate in comparison to white chocolate, what we can measure is what we can use is a measure. It's called FMD, flow-mediated dilation. So it measures actually how well your blood vessels can react. So this is one important outcome if we think of cardiovascular disease in its early stages, okay? How reactive are our blood vessels? And eating dark chocolate, we have a huge reaction, so a few percent change only after a couple of hours so there is really what I'm trying to say is that antioxidant-rich food, dark chocolate in comparison to white chocolate, is well able to produce changes in our body, but it's not obvious from tests that can be done in a test tube, okay? And to add on, so the perception on antioxidants, on what we can detect with a test tube assay has really changed in the last number of years, and we have realized that what we thought these sort of direct effects of antioxidants are really potentially minor in comparison what's actually happening in the body, so that rather coming through the front door, antioxidants are coming in through the back door. We have a lot of indirect effects, so they can a proportion of antioxidants is being taken up by our body, so they do something. They can lower, for example, inflammation to some extent. They can induce what we call antioxidant enzymes, which help us to detoxify oxygen radicals. They can inhibit an pro-oxidant enzyme and suppress stress-related signaling pathways. So this is all good news, okay? Although it's not as was originally expected. And I've also got, well, I sneaked the slide in to look again at effects of antioxidants of aging, but not in humans, but in a model organism, because we may have to also think about sort of long-term, lifelong considerations. Okay, and if we extrapolate that on Caenorhabditis elegans, where we can see that if these worms are being fed antioxidants, their lifespan can increase for a worm dramatically. Okay, and this seems to be depending also on the dose that they are being given. However, if we give them too much, okay, so also an important consideration is, can there be too much? Very high amounts can actually reduce the lifespan of these organisms. Okay, so some interesting finding. So if we think about antioxidant-rich food, so we're thinking about fruit and vegetables, and we all know, yeah, we have the 5 a day. We should be eating 5 portions of fruit and veg. So, but what is the evidence actually? Is the more the better? And there is a recent, I wanted to share with you the findings of a recent systematic review meta-analysis where colleagues from Leeds were also involved in, and what they found is that increased intake of fruit and vegetables is associated with a reduced risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer, and all-cause mortality. So whatever the exact mechanisms are, we can see that there is a reduced risk for these conditions, and they were observed for up to 800 grams per day for outcomes except cancer was 600 grams per day. So this seems to be effects that are linked to the dose. So to some extent, the more the better. Okay, and these associations referred in particular to apples, pears, citrus fruits, green leafy vegetables, cruciferous vegetable salads, for this cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality, and in particular related to cancer, green, yellow vegetables, and cruciferous vegetables. So I think this is really strong, a strong message coming from this systematic review, which are looking at a large, and they actually looked at a very large number of studies that were conducted in this space. Okay. And I fear I have to conclude at this point. So we are realizing, working in the antioxidant space, we realize, so the opinion on how things work, how they could work, have changed a lot in the last few decades. There is much more to antioxidants that we originally perceived, and as antioxidants are appearing in fruits and veg, many of which come with a lot of color. So I can only animate you, so as a takeaway message, to fill your plate with colored food. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for that really insightful talk, Christine. I thought it was really interesting to find out more about the molecular basis of antioxidants, and I thought it was really cool that some of you already knew about free radicals. So thank you, Anna. We'll see you again for the panel discussion. And I need to remind you guys to post all of your questions in the comments on Facebook, on YouTube. We'll be monitoring them and we'll be choosing ones for the panel discussion later. So now we're going to take a 5-minute break, during which you can go stretch your legs, refill your drinks. It is Pint of Science after all. But if you can, take this with you, because we will pose a challenge to you. And we want you to think about designing a food of the future. So what do you think the food of the future is going to look like? But also, what would you like to see from future food? We know that there has been a huge drive in more vegan products, more sustainable products. Do you think that we'll have lab-grown food? Do you think that maybe we'll invent nuts that don't trigger nut allergies? Do you think everything will be gluten-free? There's so many possibilities, and we would love to find out what you think will happen in the future. So to inspire you, me and Alex are going to talk about our future foods. I will start with mine. I basically went very selfish and thought, what two things do I really love in combination? So I thought I would invent a chocolate banana, which is a banana by all nutritional content, but tastes like it's been dipped in Nutella. So I get to enjoy it without feeling guilty. Also, this drawing serves to prove that you don't have to be good at art to take part in this challenge. Please draw your own. Use the hashtags on the bottom. Post it on Twitter. We will be monitoring those as well. And I also have to apologize for how ugly my actual chocolate banana is. But halfway through drawing it on Microsoft Paint, I realized that yellow and brown is not a very enticing combination, so I tried to do the best that I could. And now we can look at Alex's, which is significantly nicer, and she can tell us what she has invented.
Okay, I love yours. The paint skills are far better than anything I can done. I'm afraid mine's just in coloured pencils. But mine's inspired by my friend and I doing virtual cook-alongs during lockdown and trying out a new recipe every different week. But every single time when we start chopping the onions, we have to have a breather. We have to give ourselves a couple minutes just because they make us tear up. So my idea is to create onions that have tear-preventing technology. I've written they'll come in all the accepted onion colours, so that's obviously white onions, red onions for your salads, maybe spring onions, although they don't really make you cry. And then I just tried to put in as many puns as I could, so saying that it would be cutting edge technology, there'd be layers of protection, things like that. So mine is only slightly better drawn than Maria's, but probably a less good idea, similarly selfish. We did have a think about some other ideas. So there was some talk about carrots that would help you see in the dark, like that myth. Are there any more you thought, Maria?
I think I kind of thought of the chocolate banana and stopped there, to be honest. I thought, you know what, that's the best I can come up with.
I also thought of using the crusts of bread as hair rollers, because there's always this myth that eating the crusts of breads will make your hair curly. So I thought that would work quite well if you could get kind of very cheap perm just from buying a loaf of bread.
That is very sustainable indeed.
Very sustainable, maybe a bit crummy, but
as long as there are no actual crumbs in your hair, I think maybe we'll have to invent a bread that doesn't, well, that's just stale bread, isn't it? One that doesn't really leave any crumbs.
Yeah, and I think it would also conflict with all the crustless bread that a lot of people's children like. Well, they don't have any crusts, so if that's a food of the future, and then all the crusts can just be sent over to the perming salons, that would be perfect.
That's a circular economy right there.
Our producer also mentioned that they quite like an unnamed energy drink that would actually give you wings and let you fly around and transport yourself places. So there's all sorts of options out there for foods of the future.
As long as we don't get sued by Red Bull for stealing their idea and actually making it true.
We would like to say now, legal disclaimer, we should have a banner up on the bottom of the screen saying, please don't sue us. Thank you, Martin. I think we're starting to come to the end of our break. We have about 1 minute left of it. So we'll give you a couple of seconds. And what is that drink?
It's a pint of wine.
That's what you need to get through the nerves of doing this kind of show, I reckon. Okay, according to my clock, it's now 8 o'clock. So that brings us to the end of our 5-minute break. So I think we should all start to settle in, grab a biscuit, and I'm going to introduce you to our second speaker, who is Mark. So Mark's also part of the School of Food and Nutrition at the University of Leeds, specialities in appetite control, exercise and diet. So take it away, Mark.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for taking your time, everyone, to listen to the talk tonight. So I've titled the talk, Can You Outrun a Bad Diet? And I'm going to focus for the next 10-15 minutes or so on how exercise affects appetite control. And by appetite control, I kind of mean subjective sensations of hunger and actual food intake. And this is an area that I think everyone's got a kind of an opinion on, and it's always in the papers. And really what I want to do today is just go through some of the kind of scientific evidence and see what that says in terms of how exercise affects appetite and food intake. Now, I've tried to keep the talk, I guess, quite science light and give you some of the more kind of headline messages. And I think one of the first things that I want to stress is it's very easy in a talk like this to focus on the effects of exercise on body weight. But we know the effect of exercise on health is really extensive. And there's overwhelming evidence to suggest that physical activity and exercise is not just beneficial for weight management, it's beneficial for a whole range of other physical and mental conditions. And I'm not going to talk about them today, but we know that there's a strong evidence that says being physically active reduces your risk of developing a whole host of diseases. So when we talk about the benefits of exercise, it's not just about body weight. And you could probably argue that body weight in itself isn't a particularly good measure, because actually what's more important to us is to look at how perhaps activity and exercise affect things like fat mass and fat-free mass. So rather look at changes in body composition rather than body weight. And another really important point to make, and one that perhaps isn't as well known, is that many of the benefits of physical activity and exercise are independent of any weight change. So if one of you guys was to start an exercise training program and you were to start to cycle or run for the next 3 months or so, and on the surface of it you didn't see any change in your body weight over that training period, it's still likely that you're going to see a whole host of physiological adaptations or benefits. So we get improvements in things like cardiovascular fitness and cardiovascular adaptations. We get improvements in glucose metabolism and insulin resistance. And we also get things like reductions in the amount of lipid or fat stored in the liver. And also exercise is perhaps thought to preferentially reduce visceral fat, which is the fat stored around the central regions that's particularly harmful. And these beneficial changes can occur independent of any change in body weight. So we're getting these beneficial effects without any changes in body weight. So I think on this kind of first slide, my take-home message is that we need to be promoting physical activity and exercise for their overall effect on health, not just focus on changes in body weight. But I think we all kind of are really focused around body weight as an issue, and we know there's a lot of research looking at how exercise affects body weight. And what I want to do really is just touch upon this area for a couple of slides, and then move on to how exercise affects appetite control and food intake. And as I said, the literature in this area is quite extensive, and it's quite consistently shown that if you do exercise over a prolonged period of time, and you do exercise alone without any dietary restriction, you will get modest reductions in body weight. So you tend to see around 1.5 to 3 kilograms reductions in body weight. So they're not huge reductions or changes in body weight, but you will see a reduction in body weight. But interestingly, the amount of weight that you typically lose is less than we would theoretically expect based on the energy expenditure. So I won't kind of go into the kind of maths behind it, but if we know precisely how much energy you're expending, we can predict how much weight we'd expect you to lose. And studies demonstrate that people lose less weight than we would expect based on their energy expenditure. And that suggests there must be some form of compensation going on in other areas of energy balance that's offsetting that energy expenditure. And I'm going to talk about that compensation pathways in a moment. But these findings, to me, have been wrongly used to suggest that exercise is ineffective for weight management. and shouldn't really be used as a weight management tool. And we see kind of headlines like this shown here, that health warning, exercise makes you fat and why exercise won't make you thin, in some of our regular media outlets. So these are from The Independent and The Guardian, so supposedly good quality publications. So what I want to do really is start to try and unpick some of the evidence and try and get a head around what's really happening in terms of exercise. How does it impact on body weight, and particularly how does it impact on changes in appetite and food intake? And I think one of the first issues that we need to tackle, and perhaps generally isn't acknowledged in these types of articles, is that we need to, I guess, acknowledge that there's different phases of weight management. So we can kind of break down this weight management cycle, if you like, into initial weight gain, periods of weight loss, and then periods of weight loss maintenance. And to me, it's important to acknowledge these different phases, because to me, they are distinct phases. So the physiological, environmental and psychological factors that influence an individual in one of these phases differs depending on what phase they're in. And that means when we're looking at the determinants of their, I guess, success within each phase, it can vary. So when we're talking about the role of exercise, we need to think about what stage that we're talking about. Now, I'm not going to talk about the effect of exercise in weight loss maintenance today, because I haven't really got the time, but we know one of the main challenges for us in terms of weight maintenance is actually weight loss maintenance. So we know that people can lose weight, but the challenge is getting them to maintain that weight loss over prolonged periods of time. And we know that physical activity is one of the strongest predictors of successful weight loss maintenance. What I'm going to talk about just briefly for one slide is the role that physical activity and exercise play in the prevention of initial weight gain, because I think that's a really important area, and I think there's a really nice message coming through from some of the literature. And then I'm going to talk more in depth around how exercise affects appetite and food intake during periods of weight loss. So I'm not going to show too many slides like this with, I guess, data from journals, but I think this one's a really nice study and with a really important message to get across. And so I mentioned that one of the phases that we need to look at is the role that physical activity is playing in the prevention of weight gain in the first place. And there's a really nice study from the UK Biobank that's been recently published. So the UK Biobank is a large longitudinal tracking survey where they look at genetic, environmental and lifestyle factors and how they influence development of disease. And this data is from about 60,000 individuals who are part of a sub-study of the Biobank where physical activity has been objectively measured. So they measure physical activity using accelerometers, which are, I guess, a wrist-worn device, a bit like a Fitbit, but more accurate. And they measured the amount of physical activity people were doing. And they also used the Biobank data to develop what they termed a genetic risk profile for BMI. So there was 93, I guess, genes that have been shown to be associated with elevated levels of BMI. And they used that kind of genes to classify people in terms of their genetic risk of elevated BMI. And they categorized them into quartiles, so the low risk group up to a higher risk group based on their kind of genetic profile. And they also then within each group divided people into low, moderate and high levels of physical activity. And on the y-axis here we've got the BMI score. And the first important take-home message, I think, is that high physical activity was associated with a lower BMI. And that's seen across the board in a large number of studies, albeit cross-sectional, that show that higher levels of physical activity tend to be associated with lower levels of BMI. But I think the second really important observation in this study is that the beneficial effects of physical activity was also seen in those with a high genetic susceptibility to increased BMI. So in this higher quartile here, we can see that those with the highest physical activity levels still had the lowest level of BMI. And there's a number of other studies like this supporting that physical activity moderates the genetic susceptibility for high BMI. So being physical activity is beneficial in terms of preventing weight gain in the first place. Now, one of the questions that people always ask, and it was touched upon in the little questions in the break, is which is more effective for weight loss, diet versus exercise? And generally what people show is that you tend to lose more weight through dietary restriction than exercise alone. But a lot of these studies fail to match the energy deficit between them. So they don't match the energy deficit created through diet to the amount of energy that's expended through exercise. And I've got a couple of examples here that I guess buck that trend. So they are relatively old studies now, but they're very nice and well-controlled studies. And they took a group of individuals with overweight or obesity, and they either went through a dietary restriction program, restricting to 1,000 calories a day, or exercised 5 days a week for 60 minutes and expending 1,000 calories. So the diet restriction was matched to the energy expenditure. And in that scenario, you see that the weight loss is pretty even. So when you match the amount of energy expended, you tend to get very similar amounts of weight loss. But in these studies, an important factor to consider is that they heavily controlled the diet in those that were exercising. So there wasn't an opportunity for people to eat more or less in response to the exercise intervention. So the question really is, what happens to people's appetite and food intake under more free living type environments? And to try and understand that, we can come back to this energy balance equation. And on the face of it, it looks very simple. So we have this relationship between energy intake and energy expenditure. But underneath that, when we start to look at the factors that underlie the regulation of intake and expenditure, it's much more complicated. And we can see that in terms of energy intake, we have not just considerations around the macronutrient composition, but we know there are subjective sensations of appetite, which are in themselves underpinned by, I guess, physiological feedback stimuli or regulatory pathways. So energy balance is quite complicated. And actually, we also know that when you perturb one component of energy balance, you'll get compensation in other areas. So we have behavioural biological compensation that might act to attenuate this energy deficit. And that's what I want to talk about for the next few slides. So in terms of energy balance, we know if we are in negative energy balance, for instance, we'll lose not just fat mass, but also fat-free mass. But what's perhaps isn't recognised is those reductions, say, in fat mass, alter some of the physiological regulatory systems involved in appetite. So if I change the amount of fat mass an individual has, I also change perhaps or potentially change the concentration of circulating appetite hormones and some of these hormones involved in the food reward-based systems. And they in turn can alter appetite behaviour. So our food intake, not just in terms of the amount we eat, but also perhaps what we eat. We also know that changes in fat-free mass can alter or reduce energy expenditure. So we see that changes in body composition alter the physiological regulatory systems in a way that can act as a pull on our appetitive or energy balance behaviours. So physiology is influencing our behaviour. Now, I'm going to kind of gloss over this slide quite quickly because I think I'm already running out of time. But in terms of what controls appetite, we have these short-term and long-term feedback signals. And we know that there is some physiological feedback or regulatory systems that works on a meal-to-meal basis and centers around the release of hormones from the gastrointestinal tract, but also some longer-term signals that try and match your food intake to energy requirements. And those energy requirements stem really from things like fat-free mass and RMR, but also adipose tissue through a particular hormone such as leptin. So what I want to kind of finish up is by examining how physical activity and exercise alters this regulation of appetite. And I've tried to summarize it in this figure here. So we've got study duration and energy intake compensation. So this energy intake compensation really is how your energy intake changes in response to exercise. So what we find is with a single bout of exercise, there is very little or no change in appetite and food intake. So in terms of a single bout of exercise, people tend not to show increases in appetite or food intake. However, if we progress that exercise in terms of duration and we get people to exercise regularly for 7 or 14 days, we start to see partial compensation in energy intake. So people's energy intake start to track the increase in energy expenditure, but it's only partial. And studies tend to show there's about a 30% increase in energy intake relative to the energy expended. So if you're expending 500 calories a day through exercise, you'll compensate for about 30% of that through energy intake, so about 100 calories. And if you progress that further to more longer term type interventions, again, we see evidence of this partial tracking in energy intake. So while acute exercise doesn't seem to influence appetite or food intake, when we do it over more longer term periods, then we start to get increases in appetite and food intake. And you might think, okay, that's not a very good message to give. But actually, what we also need to do is not just consider how appetite or food intake changes, but try and envisage it in the context of energy balance and particularly energy intake. And what we find is that people with low levels of physical activity are in what we term a non-regulated zone, while people with high levels of physical activity are in a regulated zone. And here we see that with low physical activity, energy intake is high, but also those with high levels of physical activity, intake is also high. And on the face of it, you think, okay, does that make sense? But if we start to consider physical activity or energy expenditure as well, we can see that it starts to, I think, make more sense. So these individuals with low levels of physical activity have a large energy gap, i.e. their energy intake is significantly over their energy requirements. But as people become more physically active, what we find is they tend to become more or better able to regulate their food intake in line with their energy requirements. And what we find is in those who are physically active on a regular basis have a close matching between their energy intakes and their energy expenditure. So they exist in this regulated zone where food intake better matches their energy expenditure. And in terms of why, well, we know that regular physical activity increases post-meal satiety, so people feel feel fuller after a meal when they're physically active. And we also see changes in some of these physiological feedback systems, such as increased gastric emptying and the concentrations of satiety hormones, etc. So there's some physiological reasons underpinning these changes in appetite. So I am now over time, so I'll just try and wrap up quickly. And in coming back to this question, can you outrun a bad diet? And my answer to that is no. Exercise doesn't give you carte blanche to everything you want. While physical activity and exercise has a whole host of physical benefits and psychological benefits and improves perhaps appetite control over the longer term, a high energy entity diet has the capacity to undermine that because we can consume a large amount of calories very quickly. So to conclude, a single bout of exercise doesn't increase appetite or food intake, but we see partial compensation with longer term exercise. But with regular physical activity, we tend to see this stronger coupling between energy intake and energy expenditure. So our intake is matching our energy needs more accurately, and that should, over the long term, help promote better regulation of body weight. So for me, not only is physical activity beneficial for health, but also it's a beneficial way of improving our appetite control. So thank you very much for your time. And I think that is everything.
That was brilliant.
For going over it.
No, not at all. It's fine. It was really interesting. I am disappointed that me just running once every month maybe won't actually help me lose weight, and I should actually keep that up for a bit longer. But it was a really interesting talk. So as well as listening to you talk, I've also been scouring Twitter and Instagram to see what you've all come up with for the foods of the future. So unfortunately, there were some people saying that I was having crummy ideas. I don't know what that's about, Jess Buttress. Also people crying at my drawings. I'm assuming that's because of just how good they were. The one on the furthest right isn't actually a food for thought or a future food, but it's from the France Pint of Science, and someone's baked a cake, so I figured I'd put that on there too because I really liked it. And then in terms of future food ideas, Ros French has come up with a never-ending vegan sausage roll. I think we should definitely get Greg's on the phone to get that in prep. And hopefully it won't upset Piers Morgan too much. I then absolutely loved Emily's idea, which is a sandwich that has, you can eat the packaging as well. She says it might not be so good for coronavirus because obviously if someone's handling the food, you don't want to be eating it. But I really love that idea. We also have somebody in our lab that really struggles to take the packaging off sandwiches. So that would solve all of their problems. I've then got an idea from our producer, Marcin, who's come up with a hot sauce bottle that you can change the level of spice as you bring it out, which would definitely be good for me for dinners, so I don't have to have anything too spicy. And then finally, this one that I think Piers has come up with, which is basically capsules of just blue antioxidants to match blueberries. So that brings me to the end of the food for thought. I'm going to hand back over to Maria, who's going to do the question and answer session.
Thank you, Alex. So we've had loads of interesting questions, but we'll just have to pick a few to answer. So first up, we have Apollo McDonald asking, this is for you, Christine, are vegan diets actually healthier for you? What professional studies have been done?
Okay, so there's a lot of interest in the health benefits of vegetarian vegan diet in the last couple of years. So this has been looked into mainly in sort of larger observational studies. So the evidence at the moment is there that a plant-based diet, so this has been highlighted, consuming plant-based diet is probably the most confident evidence. So plant-based diet means is mainly plants, but it also contains some meat. Okay, so we don't have to forget that when we consume a vegetarian or in particular vegan diet, that we might be running short of iron, because iron availability from plants is incredibly low, much lower than compared to animal sources. We also might have problems with B12 because it's mainly available through animal foods, and vitamin D is also only available through limited number of sources. So yes, so the evidence is on the plant-based diet side. Okay, if that answers the question.
Okay, and our next question is from Tom Likes Unicorn. Me too, Tom. Is BMI still regarded as a good metric for assessing how healthy people are? This one is for you, Mark. Or are other metrics such as hip to weight ratio better regarded?
Thank you. It's a really good question, and I guess my answer is it depends on what you're trying to measure. So BMI was devised as a population measure to look at disease risk, and it only requires height and weight. So it's meant to be used in large surveillance type studies to give an indication of disease risk. It is not a measure of body composition, and if you want to get an accurate measure of body composition, then you need to use specific tools to do that. But for body composition, those bits of equipment to measure it accurately are very expensive and time consuming, so it's not always feasible to put in those types of measures into studies. So that's why, although BMI is limited in terms of what it can tell you, it's not always feasible to have more precise measures of body composition. That said, at the population level, BMI does give a good indication of disease risk. So it is strongly associated with elevated disease risk. So yes, it's not a measure or an accurate measure of body composition, but it still has uses within, I guess, science.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is again for you, Mark, from Andreas. Is there something like the yo-yo effect for exercise? So if you start working out, but eventually revert to your original state?
Yeah, unfortunately, with exercise, there is the sort of average of you either do it or you lose it. So you can get quite rapid adaptations, beneficial adaptations to exercise when you do it over a regular basis. But once you stop exercising, then you will quickly revert back to that, I guess, baseline state. So you certainly do see detraining once you stop exercising. So unfortunately, we try and promote physical activity and exercise as a long-term, I guess, lifestyle change rather than something you do over a short period of time and then go back to your kind of low level of physical activity or sedentary behavior, if you like.
Okay, thank you. And maybe one more quick question. We have one from Becky Blunden that is for you, Christine. Does how fruits and vegetables are grown impact on the quantity and quality of antioxidants? For example, if it's grown in a mass production or homegrown?
Yes, there's been a lot of interest in comparing conventionally grown vegetables against organically grown. So if I can make that comparison. However, the Food Standards Agency, I think, has been looking into that a couple of years ago, also in a big review. However, the evidence is not there. Because we also have to consider what is grown. You know, you've got different varieties of crops and local grow conditions. So it could not be linked to the fact that it was, for example, organically grown. Although a driver for many people in particular to grow their own is the taste. I have to say that, but for sure, if you consume homegrown or organically grown vegetables, they are low in pesticides. So this is something that is, so the chemical residue values are very, so they are very different.
Okay, thank you so much. This has been such an interesting evening, learning a lot about food. We have one more question, but that is for you, the audience, and I will hand over to Alex now, who will ask you the question.
Yes, so one more question. Not as complicated as the ones we just asked the speakers. Those are some fantastic questions in the comment section. But I want you to go to www.menti.com again. This time it's a slightly different code. That's 1653094. And I want you to tell us even, have any of your opinions on food and nutrition changed during the show? Maybe you know it all already and it hasn't changed at all. Or maybe you're seeing things in a new light, knowing that antioxidants, you need a plate of different colours to get them properly. Or that actually it takes more than exercise. You also need the diet and the kind of long-term effects of it. So yeah, let us know what you think. Have your opinions changed? Have they not? So that's www.menti.com, code 6153094. Okay, we're getting a lot of kind ofs. One person's not at all. I'm guessing that maybe you're one of the speakers, maybe you're a food scientist. Oh, 2 people that have completely changed their ideas on it, hopefully for the better. And 5 people that are not really. 26 of you have answered. We've got 215 of you watching. Of course, you don't all have to tell us what you think. We just want to get an idea of what you've thought of the show through this. One not sure, or that one person on the fence. A lot of kind ofs. Well, that's really good going. My opinion's definitely changed throughout this. I feel like I've learned a lot more about how diet and exercise kind of interact thanks to Mark's talk. Yeah, it looks like that's going to keep growing. Feel free to continue putting in your thoughts into that. I'm going to leave that live for a bit longer. So that's www.menti.com and the code is 1653094. I would just like to start to bring the show to a close. So I'd like to start by thanking my co-host, Maria, who's had to put up with me through all of these practice sessions that we've had. And then, of course, our 2 fantastic speakers who've really contributed to me learning more about food and nutrition, which has been fantastic. And then we also have our behind the scenes team. So that's Alex Flynn, who's been on the comments all evening, replying to you all, and Marcin, our 1-man production team. So yeah, thank you.
And thank you so much, Alex, for being a brilliant co-host and your art skills balancing mine out.
And thank you for your snappy comments. And we'd also like to thank the audience for taking part so much. Like you taking part in this has really made the show. Thank you and good night.
Good night.
my name is Adam. I will be your quiz master for this evening. I certainly hope you're going to enjoy yourself. Here we go.